What's up guys, D2 from DTwoAOV.com here, back from the dead. I was gone for a little while, but back writing articles, back making videos. This time it's going to be about a small patch that hit the Taiwan server about a week ago on April 25th. And this patch, even though it hit the Taiwan server, and even though every patch that hits a Taiwan server, or I should say every change that comes to the Taiwan server eventually comes to every other server, don't expect to see these changes anytime soon on your particular server, especially if you're on the Tencent servers, because how it usually works is there's a big patch and a small patch, at least on Taiwan. On Taiwan, there's a big patch, small patch, big patch, small patch, and in the West, it's only big patch, big patch, big patch, big patch, big patch, right? And in the big patch that comes to the Western servers, the smaller patches that occurred on Taiwan are included in that. So don't expect these changes to come, at least until the next huge change comes, and then you'll see them all kind of combined together into one change. Now, there was like a Reddit post about the test server changes. Not all of those test server changes made it over. In fact, some of the changes were different. For instance, like Teamy's Pooty Pooch CDR, it was supposed to go from 40 to 50, actually got to nerf from 40 to 30. And, you know, things like the Soul Raver and the Omniarm changes did not make it over, whereas things like Florentino, you see, this says that the CC immunity is removed, but not only that, he actually got some damage taken off his triple threat as well. So let's get to that without any further ado. Only 5 heroes, only 5 changes, but some of these are pretty big, so let's get on to them. Starting with Xenial. So Xenial, he had his early game damage buffed by 50, early game shield and damage, and then he had his Malleus early game damage buffed by 70. And then the late game it's only 20, and this is like a barely noticeable ability power change, especially if you consider that you don't even really want to be building ability power on Xenial. You're kind of wasting your time doing so. You'd rather just get as much HP as possible, and that provides you enough damage. Just ignore these ads, by the way. This is geared towards me on my own website, so just let's just ignore that. Anyway, so this is good for Xenial because his biggest weak point is the early game. And so being able to shore that up is really nice for him. It's not the biggest change, but the fact that he's able to not completely get shut down in the early game like he was in the past is going to be a big deal for him. So I did give a 1.5 for that. And basically, if you look at my balance change ratings, it basically goes from -5 being completely nerfed in Oblivion, and 5 being ridiculous, and then 0 is basically barely noticeable change. So 1.5, it's somewhere between a tiny buff and a small buff. It's pretty decent, and he'll be happy about it. Next one is Amelie. So on the Taiwan server here, her health was restored from this base amount plus attack damage, scaling at 50%. And now it's just 8% of max HP, and there's no base amount, but obviously you have a base amount of max HP, so that's going to be actually more. And the cooldown of Rage was reduced by 10 seconds through all stages of it. And if you do the math, this is actually a pretty big buff for her, unless you build her full damage. Even if you have all offensive Arcana, which I think you still want to do, especially because you need that offensive Arcana in the early game, it's still a 37 HP buff in the early game. And if you just go a hybrid build, like your standard, you know, just throw in Mantle of Raw, you maybe get like one offensive item, it's still going to be like 300 more HP. The only way you'd ever get more health restored by going in the old version, or the current version, I should say, for Tencent servers, would be if you went full just glass cannon. And you don't really do that, even if you're like jungling with Emily, you still don't really do that. It's kind of weird to build her full glass cannon. And even then, it's still only a significant difference if you pop your ult, which provides you 200 extra AD. Otherwise, it's only like a negligible difference. So this is a pretty big buff here for Emily. And then you add on the fact that Enrage, she's going to get it much more often. The Enrage was really high of a cooldown if you consider what it does for her. Like people with similar ults or similar operating ults like Lubu and Kildegross, for instance, they have much lower cooldowns. I think their cooldowns are still their ult cooldowns are still lower than Emily's, but hers is closer to that range. And now she's going to be able to duel in the lane. She's going to be able to get in the back of team fights, and you really have to have her ult when you go into a team fight. or else you're not going to be able to come out of there alive. So you need to be able to pop that. You need to get the extra damage resistance from that, so you can dive in the backline, kind of be like a poor man's Richter in a way, and be useful in this team fight. So it's really nice to have this extra 10 seconds, especially in the early game if you're trying to join those team fights a lot more often. All right, next change was Teamy. So they buffed Teamy last time, and they probably didn't realize how strong he's going to get after the item changes. And especially since all the pros started playing Teamy a lot more, it kind of showed the rest of the ladder players like how good he could possibly be. And keep in mind that in Taiwan, they're doing this not just for people on the ladder, but also for professional play. So it used to be the buff that they gave Teamy was, if you hold on to Pooty Poots for the longest possible time you hold in those farts, then it would reduce the cooldown by a maximum of 40%. And obviously you get less of a CDR if you release it earlier. But now that is decreased to 30%. And on top of that, the cooldown is increased from 5 to 6 seconds. Now, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. It's only 1 second here. It's only, this is about, depending on how long, I guess you can just do the math, right? So what would 10% of 6 seconds be 0.6 seconds? So it's like you're basically adding a decent chunk on, but it makes it even worse because your Teamy was used to being able to use his Pooty Poots extremely often. And having that on a higher cooldown, not being able to have so many kills is a big deal. But I do like the fact that they have decided to nerf this part of Teamy's kit rather than nerf his ults or their ult for the billionth time. So it hurts a little bit, but I still only gave it a -2, just because it's a small nerf. It hurts. They'll feel it, but it's not the craziest thing in the world. By the way, Amelie, I did give a 3. That's one of the bigger numbers I will give a hero because Tencent usually doesn't buff or nerf heroes that much. I guess they buff heroes pretty huge sometimes, occasionally, but never. They don't really nerf people all that much. Anyway, moving on to Caffney. Speaking of nerfs. They reduced her base damage on Rapid Shot. Now, this doesn't seem like a lot. It's reduced from 5 to 20, or 5 in the early game, 20 in the late game when she leveled up. The reason why this is a big deal is because she shoots so fast. And every shot, these damage numbers apply to 1 of 2 shots when she actually shoots. And she shoots like about 5 times per second. I tried to measure it. It's about that much. I measured like... I think it was like 15 times in 3 seconds, something like that. So it works out to like 5 or maybe a little bit higher than 5 times per second, which means that this turns into about 100 damage per second, which it's not the worst, but it's also, it's not like you're losing quite a bit. Most of your damage does come from this 0.25 scaling, but you are losing quite a bit. The bigger deal is Fusillade, where she lost 10 seconds on her ult, so you can't just spam it out like all the time now and clear waves and always just basically be an ult bot if you're not comfortable walking out to people and shooting. And then also the damage was reduced by quite a bit. Not only was the base damage reduced, but it was reduced by a lot if you consider the attack scaling here, because even though 0.05 doesn't sound like a lot, it is obviously 1/6 of the total scaling. So early on, with her ult, she's losing 375 damage. And the last thing I want to point out here is that it's damage per wave, and there's 15 waves, right? Because it's a wave every 0.2 seconds, and then she shoots 5 waves, or sorry, it lasts for 3 seconds. So therefore, it shoots 15 times, and if you do the math, it's 375 damage lost over the entirety of the ult. 125 per second because you figure that your opponent's going to be running away. And then that's at level 4. And once you get to a full build and you're at level 15, that goes all the way up to 975 damage lost total and 325 per second lost total. So it's quite a bit of damage that she is losing. Obviously, she's still going to be reasonably good, but this is going to hurt quite a bit. And I'm not sure. The thing is, I still think she's going to be reasonable. Perhaps I should have given her -3, but I said -2.5 because she's still going to be pretty decent. But the lack of damage is going to be felt, certainly. Last change is going to be Florentino. I never noticed this bug, so let's just talk about this change and this change. So first with Shuffle, he's no longer immune to control effects, and I like this because it seemed like an RNG effect in a way. I mean, it wasn't obviously, but you kind of just use your combo when you could, right? If you could get the blossom, if you could reach the blossom or the flower on the ground, excuse me, and then you just immediately go into your next shot because you don't want to waste time, especially because it'll reduce your cooldowns back to 0 again. And just pulling off the combo in and of itself while in the midst of a chaotic game was hard enough. And add to that a lot of times Florentino was banned out in higher level games. Like, I don't think anyone in the world, honestly, was capable of deliberately getting the CC immunity off. I mean, the only way that would happen is if it was like a very high level professional and he was getting to practice him a lot, which obviously those two things did not intersect at all. So I would say that you're basically getting rid of an RNG effect because you're just kind of randomly using your ult or randomly using your combo, and sometimes you'd be able to escape immunity because you just happen to use it at the right time. So now it's less of a random thing, and also it means that you kind of have to use your ult if you're around a group of people, because you might be able to take on a few people at a time by using the CC immunity and kind of getting lucky. But now you really have to use your ult because you want to be able to get the CC immunity from everyone that you're fighting against, except for the person you're dueling, which is how his Gentleman's Duel works. All right. So, yeah, that it's a somewhat big deal, but it's not the hugest ever. I think equally as important, or if not more important, are these damage nerfs. So, last patch he got stealth nerfed. I think maybe the Taiwanese devs didn't realize like the numbers had changed, or whoever there was something lost in communication when it went from the devs to the Taiwanese patch writers or something like that. Because last time, and you can check my most recent video, I'm not sure, that his not only the scaling for the true damage on his triple threat was nerfed, but also his base damage was nerfed from 275 to 225 on this, and I believe it was like 225 to 200 on this, because obviously this is counted twice. In that particular patch, the maximum, the level 6 triple threat was nerfed as well quite a bit. But this time it was only his early game numbers. And to be honest, that's the more significant one, because obviously the later in the game that he gets, the more damage he's going to be able to get off of the true damage, especially when it starts ramping up with his attack damage. So I would say that this is pretty significant. In the last patch, I kind of gave him like a minus like 2 or 2.5, but I didn't know that he got stealth buffed as well on top of that. By the way, something I didn't mention in the previous video was that he actually got the, I mean, you can see it on the screen, but he got the movement speed reduction taken off of his first attack of the triple threat. So that's another nerf. So what I thought was like a 2 to 2.5 nerf, if you look at my scale, it actually was more like a 3. And then I'm basically giving him a 2 here, which is saying it's like a small nerf. So if you combine everything together, it's really like if you consider you take 300 damage off of his entire combo, you take off a significant amount of damage in the late game in the base portion of damage as well, and you take off the true damage, and you take off the CC immunity, and you take off what was the last thing? The slow. Then you really have to give him a 4. Like, if you combine both of these nerfs together on the Taiwan server, he is really heavily nerfed. I mean, you can't really nerf him harder than that unless you completely change his kit, to be honest. And it kind of fits the bill, right? I did mention that only previously broken heroes will survive this, and well, he will survive it. He'll probably still be tier 1, maybe even still tier S, but the only reason why he's surviving is because he was completely ridiculous beforehand. All right, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Shorter video today, but I'm sure that a lot of you will enjoy that, considering how long some of my videos have been. See you guys next time, and go to DTwoAOV.com. Bye bye.